The clock on the wall showed 9:30 p.m. when Rosa Martinez pushed her cleaning cart through the grand entrance of the Harmony Arts Center. Her old sneakers made soft squeaking sounds on the shiny marble floor. At 42 years old, she had been working as a night janitor here for 3 years now. Every night was the same routine: mop the floors, dust the furniture, empty the trash, and make sure everything looked perfect for the next day. Tonight felt different, though. The whole building was buzzing with activity. Fancy cars were parked outside and well-dressed people were walking around everywhere. Rosa knew what was happening. The annual charity gala was tomorrow night. Rich people from all over the city would come to donate money for music programs in schools. Rosa pulled her cart past groups of workers setting up decorations. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and fresh flowers filled every corner. The smell of roses and lilies mixed with the cleaning supplies in her cart. She had to be extra careful tonight. Her supervisor, Mr. Chen, had already warned all the cleaning staff 3 times. Stay out of the way, don't bother the guests, and make sure everything is spotless. She made her way to the main concert hall, the most beautiful room in the entire building. Red velvet seats faced a large stage where a magnificent black piano sat in the center. Rosa had cleaned around that piano hundreds of times, but she never got tired of looking at it. The piano was a Steinway Grand, worth more money than she would make in 10 years. As she started dusting the seats in the back row, Rosa couldn't help but remember her grandmother, Abuela Carmen. When Rosa was little, Abuela had an old upright piano in her tiny apartment. It was scratched and some keys stuck, but to little Rosa, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. Abuela would sit Rosa on her lap and show her how to press the keys gently. "Music comes from the heart, mi nieta," Abuela would whisper in her ear. "You don't need fancy schools or expensive teachers. You just need to feel it inside." Rosa shook her head, pushing away the memories. That was a long time ago. Life was different now. After her husband Miguel died in a car accident 2 years ago, she had to work 2 jobs just to keep food on the table for her kids, 16-year-old Carlos and 14-year-old Isabella. There was no time for music or dreams anymore. She moved closer to the stage, pulling out her feather duster. The piano seemed to glow under the stage lights. Without thinking, Rosa climbed the 3 steps onto the stage. She looked around quickly to make sure no one was watching, then walked over to the piano. Up close, it was even more beautiful. The black surface was so polished she could see her reflection. Rosa reached out and gently touched the smooth wood. She remembered how Abuela's hands looked when she played, graceful and sure, like birds dancing on the keys. Rosa glanced around one more time, then carefully lifted the piano lid that covered the keys. The black and white keys seemed to smile at her. Her heart started beating faster. She knew she shouldn't, but she couldn't help herself. Very gently, she placed one finger on middle C and pressed down just enough to hear the softest whisper of sound. The note hung in the air for just a moment before fading away. It was perfect, clear and pure and beautiful. Rosa felt tears in her eyes. She quickly closed the piano lid and stepped back. "What are you doing up there?" Rosa jumped and turned around. Mr. Chen was standing at the bottom of the stage steps, looking annoyed. "Sorry, sir," Rosa said, hurrying down with her cleaning supplies. "I was just dusting the piano, making sure it's clean for tomorrow." Mr. Chen frowned. "Stay away from that piano. It's worth more than your house. And remember what I told you. When the guests arrive tomorrow night, you need to be invisible. Clean the bathrooms, empty the trash in the lobby, but stay out of the main hall. These people don't want to see cleaning ladies while they're trying to enjoy themselves." "Yes, sir." Rosa nodded, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. As Mr. Chen walked away, Rosa felt small and ashamed. She continued cleaning, but her mind kept drifting back to the piano. Tomorrow night, hundreds of rich people would sit in these chairs listening to beautiful music. They would eat expensive food and write big checks to help kids learn music. Meanwhile, she would be hiding in the back hallways, emptying their trash. Rosa thought about her own kids at home. Carlos was doing well in school, but he spent most of his free time working at the grocery store to help pay bills. Isabella was artistic and creative, always drawing pictures or making up songs while she did homework. But there was no money for art classes or music lessons. They were lucky if Rosa could afford new school clothes each year. The irony wasn't lost on Rosa. Here she was, cleaning a concert hall where rich people came to support music education for poor kids. But her own children, who would benefit from those programs, would never actually get to participate. There were always forms to fill out, waiting lists to join, and somehow the spots always went to other families. By midnight, Rosa had finished cleaning the main areas. The concert hall looked perfect. Every seat clean, every surface dusted, the floor mopped until it gleamed. She took one last look at the stage before turning off the lights. Tomorrow night, talented musicians would perform on that stage for an audience that could afford to pay hundreds of dollars per ticket. As she pushed her cart toward the exit, Rosa passed a bulletin board covered with photos from previous galas. Rich ladies in beautiful gowns stood next to important-looking men in expensive suits. Everyone was smiling and holding champagne glasses. In the center was a large photo of last year's guest of honor, James Wellington, the tech millionaire who had donated over $1 million to local schools. Rosa had read about him in the newspaper. He was known for being a bit eccentric, sometimes making unusual challenges or strange requests. But he always followed through on his promises, and his donations had helped thousands of kids get access to music and art programs they never could have afforded otherwise. She wondered what it would be like to have that kind of money. To be able to help people just by writing a check. Rosa worked 60 hours a week between her two jobs, and she was still barely getting by. Meanwhile, people like James Wellington probably made more money in one day than she would see in her entire lifetime. Rosa gathered her things from her small locker in the employee break room. Her reflection in the scratched mirror showed a tired woman with calloused hands and worry lines around her eyes. This wasn't the life she had imagined when she was young, sitting on Abuela's lap learning to play piano. But tomorrow was another day, and she had work to do. The bills wouldn't pay themselves, and her kids were counting on her. Rosa turned off the lights and headed out into the cold night air, already thinking about her morning shift at the hotel across town. She had no idea that tomorrow night would change her life forever. The next evening arrived faster than Rosa expected. She hurried through the employee entrance of the Harmony Arts Center, already running 10 minutes late. Her morning shift at the hotel had run over when a guest complained about towels, and then the bus was delayed. Rosa hated being late. It gave Mr. Chen another reason to be disappointed in her. She quickly changed into her uniform and grabbed her cleaning cart. The building was transformed from the night before. Elegant guests were already arriving, stepping out of luxury cars and limousines. Women wore sparkling dresses that probably cost more than Rosa's monthly rent, and men looked distinguished in perfectly tailored suits. Rosa kept her head down as she made her way to the employee corridors. Her job tonight was simple: stay out of sight and handle any cleaning emergencies that came up. Mr. Chen had been very clear about that, but as she passed by the main entrance, she couldn't help but peek through the doorway. The concert hall looked magical. Soft lighting made everything glow, and the guests moved around like characters in a fancy movie. At the center of it all, the black piano sat on stage like a sleeping giant. "Rosa, what are you doing?" She spun around to find Mr. Chen approaching with his usual frown. "Sorry, I was just checking if they needed any trash cans emptied," she said quickly. "Stay in the back areas," he reminded her, "and whatever you do, don't go near that piano. I heard the guest of honor tonight is James Wellington, the tech billionaire. He's very particular about things being perfect." Rosa nodded and pushed her cart toward the back hallways. She had seen James Wellington's picture in the newspaper, but she wondered what he was really like in person. The articles made him sound both generous and unpredictable. About an hour into the event, Rosa was cleaning the women's restroom when she heard loud voices coming from the main hall. Curious, she crept closer to listen. Through the partially open door, she could see a tall man with gray hair standing near the piano. Even from a distance, she could tell this was James Wellington. He had the kind of presence that made everyone else seem smaller. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wellington's voice boomed across the room, "I have a little challenge for you tonight." The crowd grew quiet, turning their attention to him. Rosa found herself moving closer, staying hidden behind a marble pillar but able to see and hear everything. Wellington walked over to the piano and placed his hand on the gleaming black surface. "This beautiful instrument represents everything we're here to support tonight, the power of music to change lives. So here's what I propose." He paused dramatically, and Rosa could feel the excitement building in the room. "Anyone in this room who can play just one perfect note on this piano will earn $10,000 for tonight's music program fund." The crowd buzzed with excitement, Several people laughed, thinking it would be easy money. Rosa watched as guests began looking at each other, probably trying to figure out who would go first. "One note?" called out a woman in a shimmering gold dress. "That's all?" Wellington smiled mysteriously. "One perfect note. But it has to truly move me. It has to have soul." Dr. Patricia Hayes, a well-known music teacher, stepped forward first. Rosa had seen her photo in the program. She taught at the expensive private academy across town. Dr. Hayes walked confidently to the piano, sat down, and pressed a key with perfect technique. The note rang out clear and precise. Wellington shook his head. "Technically correct, but it didn't touch my heart." Next, a man who owned several restaurants tried next. Then a lawyer who mentioned she had taken piano lessons as a child. Each person played their note with confidence, but Wellington rejected every attempt. His responses were always polite but firm. "Beautiful technique, but I'm looking for something deeper." "Lovely tone, but where's the emotion?" "Perfect pitch, but I need to feel it in my soul." After the eighth person failed, the crowd began to get restless. Rosa could hear people whispering to each other, wondering what Wellington actually wanted. Some guests seemed frustrated, others intrigued by the challenge. "This is ridiculous," muttered a man in an expensive suit. "How can one note be wrong when it's the same note?" Wellington overheard and addressed the room again. "Music isn't just about hitting the right keys, friends. It's about connecting with something deeper. The note I'm looking for will come from someone who understands that music is the language of the heart." Rosa felt her own heart beating faster. She understood exactly what he meant, even if the wealthy guests didn't seem to. It was what Abuela had always told her. Music wasn't about being perfect, it was about being real. More people tried. A banker's wife who had studied at a prestigious conservatory, a doctor who played jazz piano as a hobby, a judge who had performed in community theater. Each attempt sounded beautiful to Rosa's ears, but Wellington continued to shake his head. "I'm beginning to think this is impossible," someone called out. "Maybe he's just trying to keep his money," another person joked, though not very quietly. Wellington didn't seem bothered by the comments. If anything, he looked more determined. "I know the right note when I hear it," he said calmly. "I lost my mother 5 years ago. She worked 3 jobs to raise me, cleaning offices, washing dishes, taking care of other people's children. But every night, no matter how tired she was, she would hum while she worked. That humming was the most beautiful music I ever heard because it came from love, from strength, from a heart that never gave up." The room grew quiet again. Rosa felt tears in her eyes as she listened to Wellington's story. It sounded so much like her own life. "My mother never had piano lessons," Wellington continued. "She couldn't read music. But she had something that all the training in the world can't teach. She had soul. She had truth. And when the right person plays that note tonight, I'll hear my mother's spirit in it." Rosa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She understood now why all the trained musicians were failing. They were playing with their minds, not their hearts. The attempts continued. A few more people tried, each one sounding technically perfect but leaving Wellington unmoved. Rosa could see the frustration building in the room. Some guests were starting to move away from the piano area, convinced that Wellington's challenge was either impossible or unfair. "Anyone else?" Wellington asked, looking around the room hopefully. The crowd had grown smaller around the piano. Many people had given up and gone back to eating and socializing. Rosa realized this might be Wellington's last call for volunteers. From her hiding spot behind the pillar, Rosa felt a strange pull toward the piano. Her hands were shaking as she remembered Abuela's words. "Music comes from the heart, mi nieta. You don't need fancy schools or expensive teachers. You just need to feel it inside." But she was just the cleaning lady. These people would be shocked if she even showed her face, let alone tried to play their precious piano. Mr. Chen would probably fire her on the spot. Still, something deep inside her was stirring. Wellington was looking for truth, for soul, for the kind of music that came from real life and real struggles. Rosa had plenty of both. She stayed hidden, watching as Wellington looked around the room one more time. A few more people were gathering the courage to try, but Rosa could already tell they would fail. They were thinking too much, trying too hard to impress instead of just feeling the music. The challenge was still open, and Rosa found herself taking a small step closer to the main hall. Her heart was pounding and her palms were sweaty. She knew she shouldn't even be thinking about this, But Wellington's words kept echoing in her mind. I'll know the right note when I hear it. Rosa took another step toward the door, then stopped. She wasn't ready yet, but something told her that before this night was over, she might find the courage to try. Rosa retreated back to the employee areas, her heart still racing from what she had witnessed. She tried to focus on her work, emptying trash bins and wiping down surfaces, but her mind kept drifting back to Wellington's challenge. Every few minutes she could hear another attempt from the main hall, followed by polite applause and then Wellington's gentle but firm rejection. She was refilling paper towels in the men's restroom when she overheard two wealthy guests talking by the sinks. This is getting embarrassing, said one man, adjusting his gold cufflinks. Half the music teachers in the city have tried and none of them can satisfy this guy. Maybe he's having some kind of breakdown, replied the other man, straightening his bow tie. I mean, his mother died 5 years ago. Perhaps he's not thinking clearly. Rosa felt anger flash through her chest. These men had no idea what they were talking about. Wellington wasn't crazy. He was looking for something real, something that came from actual life experience instead of expensive music lessons. She finished her work in the restroom and moved on to the lobby areas. More guests were gathering there, having given up on the piano challenge. Rosa listened to their conversations as she worked, staying invisible like Mr. Chen had instructed. I studied piano for 12 years, complained a woman in a diamond necklace. I can play Chopin perfectly, but apparently that's not good enough for Mr. Wellington. It's just a publicity stunt, said her friend. He never intended to give away the money. One note, please. He'll just keep saying no until everyone gives up. Rosa wanted to speak up to defend Wellington, but she bit her tongue. These people didn't understand, because they had never struggled the way she had. They had never worked multiple jobs just to keep their children fed. They had never hummed lullabies while scrubbing other people's bathrooms, finding joy in small moments because that's all they had. As the evening progressed, Rosa noticed that fewer people were attempting the challenge. She could still hear Wellington encouraging volunteers, his voice never losing its hopeful tone. But the guests seemed to be losing interest, moving on to dinner and the auction portion of the evening. During a quiet moment, Rosa found herself near the kitchen service entrance that connected to the main hall. She could see Wellington standing alone by the piano, looking somewhat sad. The earlier excitement in the room had faded, and people were focused on their meals and conversations. Excuse me, miss. Rosa jumped and turned to find a young waiter holding an empty tray. Could you help me with something? He asked. There's a spill in Section 3 and I need to get it cleaned up before someone slips. Of course, Rosa said, grateful for the distraction. She followed him into the main hall, keeping her head down as she passed between the dinner tables. Rich guests were eating elaborate meals and drinking expensive wine, their earlier attempts at the piano challenge apparently forgotten. As Rosa cleaned up the spilled wine, she couldn't help but glance toward the stage. Wellington was still there, occasionally walking over to the piano and running his fingers along its edge. She could see the disappointment in his posture, though he was trying to hide it from the guests. 23 people have tried so far, she heard a server whisper to another staff member. All failures. I think Mr. Wellington is starting to realize his challenge might be impossible. Rosa's heart ached for Wellington. She could see that this wasn't about money or publicity for him. This was about honoring his mother's memory, about finding someone who understood that music was more than just technique and training. After finishing with the spill, Rosa was heading back to the kitchen when she nearly collided with Mr. Chen. There you are, he said, looking relieved. I need you to clean the upstairs bathrooms. Some of the guests are using the second floor for private conversations, and we want everything perfect up there too. Rosa nodded and made her way upstairs with her supplies. The second floor was quieter, with only a few people scattered around in small groups. From up here she could look down at the main hall through the elegant balcony railings. Wellington was addressing the crowd again, trying to drum up more interest in his challenge. We still have time tonight, he was saying. I know there's someone here who can play the note I'm looking for. Don't be afraid to try. But Rosa could see that most people had lost interest. They were more focused on the silent auction items displayed along the walls, vacation packages, jewelry, artwork. The piano challenge had become background noise to their socializing. As she cleaned the upstairs area, Rosa found herself thinking about her children at home. Carlos was probably doing homework at the kitchen table, the same table where they ate every meal because they didn't have a separate dining room. Isabella was likely in her small bedroom, drawing pictures or writing in her diary. They were good kids who deserved opportunities that Rosa couldn't afford to give them. The $10,000 Wellington was offering would change everything for her family. It would pay off their debt, buy Carlos a car so he could get a better job, maybe even allow Isabella to take the art classes she dreamed about. But more than the money, Rosa felt drawn to the challenge itself. She understood what Wellington was looking for because she had lived it. Rosa. She turned to see Mr. Chen climbing the stairs, looking agitated. "What's taking so long up here?" he demanded. "I need you back downstairs." Some guests spilled champagne near the silent auction tables. "Sorry, sir," Rosa said, quickly gathering her supplies. As they headed downstairs, Mr. Chen continued his instructions. "And remember, stay out of the main hall unless there's an emergency. Mr. Wellington is getting frustrated with his little game, and the last thing we need is staff members getting in the way." They reached the bottom of the stairs just as another guest was attempting the piano challenge. This time it was a teenager whose parents had obviously pushed him forward. The boy looked nervous as he approached the piano, his hands shaking slightly as he pressed a key. The note was sweet and clear, but Rosa could see immediately that it lacked the depth Wellington was seeking. Sure enough, Wellington shook his head gently. "A beautiful attempt, young man, but I'm looking for something more." The boy's face fell as he walked back to his parents, who looked embarrassed. Rosa felt sorry for him. He was probably a good piano student, but he was too young to have experienced the kind of life that would put real emotion into his playing. "This is ridiculous," she heard someone mutter. "No one's going to satisfy this man." Rosa continued her work, cleaning up after the dinner service. But with each failed attempt at the piano, she felt more and more certain that she could succeed where others had failed. Not because she was a better musician, she hadn't touched a piano in years, but because she understood struggle, loss, and the kind of love that Wellington was describing. The problem was, she was terrified. What if she was wrong? What if she embarrassed herself in front of all these important people? What if Mr. Chen fired her for overstepping her boundaries? But then she remembered Abuela's voice. "Music comes from the heart, mi nieta. You don't need fancy schools or expensive teachers. You just need to feel it inside." Rosa looked around the elegant room, at all the wealthy people who had tried and failed to move Wellington with their perfect technique. Maybe that was exactly the problem. Maybe Wellington was looking for someone who had learned music not in a classroom, but in life itself. The evening was getting late, and Rosa could see that Wellington was running out of volunteers. Soon he would have to admit defeat, and his generous offer would go unclaimed. The thought made her sad. Not just for the lost money, but for the lost opportunity to honor his mother's memory. Rosa made a decision. She wasn't ready to try yet, but she was going to stay close and wait for the right moment. If Wellington was about to give up, if no one else stepped forward, then maybe she would find the courage to approach that piano. After all, what did she have to lose? She was already invisible to these people. The worst they could do was ignore her or ask her to leave. But if she succeeded, if she could play the note that Wellington was looking for, it would change everything. Rosa took a deep breath and continued working, but now she was working with purpose. She was waiting for her moment. It was nearly 10:30 p.m. when Rosa realized the evening was winding down. The dinner plates had been cleared, the silent auction was closing, and many guests were starting to say their goodbyes. She had been watching from the shadows as 3 more people attempted Wellington's challenge, and all had failed. Wellington stood by the piano looking defeated. His earlier enthusiasm had faded into quiet disappointment. Rosa could see him checking his watch, probably wondering how much longer to keep trying before admitting that no one could play the note he was seeking. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wellington announced to the remaining crowd, his voice lacking its earlier energy, "we have about 15 minutes left in our evening. If anyone else would like to attempt our little challenge, now would be the time." The response was mostly silence. A few people glanced toward the piano, but no one moved forward. Rosa could hear quiet conversations starting up again as guests began to lose interest completely. "I think we should just declare it impossible and move on," suggested Dr. Hayes, the music teacher who had been one of the first to try. "You've set an unrealistic standard, Mr. Wellington." Wellington shook his head sadly. "No, it's not impossible. The right person just hasn't stepped forward yet. Rosa was cleaning glasses behind the bar when she felt something shift inside her chest. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. If she was going to try, it had to be now. In a few minutes, Wellington would give up and her chance would be gone forever. But her hands were shaking as she set down the glass she was holding. What was she thinking? She was a janitor, not a concert performer. These people would think she was crazy for even approaching their precious piano. "Rosa, we need more napkins at table 12, called out one of the servers. "Right away," Rosa replied automatically, but her feet felt frozen to the floor. She looked across the room at Wellington, who was now sitting on the piano bench with his head in his hands. The sight broke her heart. Without really deciding to do it, Rosa found herself walking toward the main hall. Her cleaning cart was forgotten behind the bar. Each step felt like it took tremendous effort, but somehow she kept moving forward. "Excuse me, miss," said a guest in a tuxedo, barely glancing at her. "Could you refill my water glass?" "In a moment, sir," Rosa heard herself say, which surprised her. Normally, she would have rushed to help immediately, but something was pulling her toward the stage with a force she couldn't resist. As she got closer, she could hear Wellington speaking quietly to Dr. Hayes. "My mother would have known exactly what note to play," he was saying. "She understood music in a way that can't be taught." Rosa stopped just a few feet away from the stage steps. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. This was insane. She should turn around right now, go back to her work, and pretend this crazy idea had never entered her mind. But then she thought about Carlos working at the grocery store instead of studying, about Isabella drawing pictures on the backs of old envelopes because they couldn't afford art supplies. She thought about Miguel, her husband who had died believing that things would get better for their family someday. Most of all, she thought about Abuela Carmen, who had taught her that music wasn't about being perfect, it was about being honest. Rosa took a deep breath and climbed the 3 steps onto the stage. The first person to notice her was Dr. Hayes, who looked confused. "Excuse me, but I think you're supposed to be working," she said, not unkindly but clearly expecting Rosa to leave. Wellington looked up, and Rosa found herself staring into his eyes. They were kind eyes, she realized, but filled with sadness and disappointment. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir," Rosa said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I'd like to try your challenge." A murmur went through the crowd as people turned to see what was happening. Rosa could feel their stares burning into her back. Someone laughed, not meanly, but as if they thought this was some kind of joke. "I'm sorry, but this is a private event," Dr. Hayes said, stepping forward. "The staff really shouldn't be participating." But Wellington held up his hand to stop her. He stood up from the piano bench and studied Rosa's face carefully. "What's your name?" he asked. "Rosa Martinez," she replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded despite her racing heart. "And you work here?" "Yes, sir. I'm the night janitor. I clean this room every day." Wellington nodded slowly. "And you think you can play the note I'm looking for?" Rosa felt every eye in the room focused on her. Mr. Chen was pushing through the crowd, looking horrified that one of his employees was making a scene. In a moment, he would reach the stage and drag her away, probably firing her in front of everyone. "I don't know if I can," Rosa said honestly, "but I understand what you're looking for. You want music that comes from real life, not just from lessons. You want someone who knows what it's like to work hard and struggle and still find beauty in small moments." The room had gone completely quiet. Even the servers had stopped what they were doing to listen. Wellington's expression softened. "And you know about those things?" Rosa nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. "My grandmother taught me that music is the language of the heart. She said you don't need fancy schools or expensive instruments. You just need to have something real to say." "Rosa," Mr. Chen had reached the stage and was climbing the steps. "Get down from there right now." "I'm so sorry, Mr. Wellington, she'll be fired immediately." But Wellington held up his hand again, more firmly this time. "Wait," he said. Then he looked back at Rosa. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. Was she a musician?" "She had an old piano," Rosa said, no longer caring who was listening. "We had to sell it when I was 12 because we needed money for rent. But she taught me that real music doesn't come from having the right instrument or the perfect technique. It comes from having something true to express." Wellington stepped aside and gestured toward the piano bench. "Then please show us what your grandmother taught you." Rosa's legs felt weak as she walked over to the piano. The bench was exactly the right height, just like Abuela's had been. She sat down and placed her hands in her lap, trying to calm her breathing. The room was so quiet she could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Every person at the gala was watching her, waiting to see what the cleaning lady thought she could do that all their trained musicians couldn't. Rosa closed her eyes and tried to block out the crowd. Instead, she thought about Miguel's smile on their wedding day. She thought about holding Carlos and Isabella as babies, singing them to sleep when they were sick. She thought about Abuela's weathered hands, showing her how to feel the music instead of just playing notes. Most of all, she thought about love, the love that had carried her through 2 years of working multiple jobs, the love that made her get up every morning and keep trying to build a better life for her children. Rosa lifted her right hand and placed it over the keys. She found middle C without looking, the same key she had touched so gently the night before. But this time she didn't hesitate. She pressed the key with all the love and pain and hope that lived in her heart. The note rang out clear and pure, filling the concert hall with a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than the piano itself. Rosa held the note for a long moment, letting it carry every emotion she had ever felt. When it finally faded into silence, she opened her eyes. Wellington was crying. The silence in the concert hall stretched on for what felt like forever. Rosa sat frozen at the piano bench, her fingers still resting on the key she had just pressed. The note had long since faded, but its echo seemed to hang in the air like a prayer. Wellington stood completely still, tears streaming down his face. His eyes were closed, and Rosa could see his chest rising and falling with deep, shaky breaths. The entire room held its breath, waiting for his response. Then, slowly, Wellington began to clap. It started as soft, gentle applause, but there was something different about it. It wasn't the polite clapping that had followed the other attempts. This was deeper, more emotional, like he was applauding something sacred. "That," Wellington said, his voice breaking, "is exactly what I was looking for." The crowd erupted into confused murmurs. People turned to each other with questioning looks, trying to understand how a simple cleaning woman had succeeded where trained musicians had failed. "What do you mean?" Dr. Hayes called out, clearly frustrated. "She played the same note as everyone else. Middle C, how is that any different?" Wellington wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and walked closer to Rosa, who was still sitting at the piano in shock. "The difference," he said, addressing the entire room, "is that she didn't just play a note. She shared her soul." Rosa felt dizzy. She couldn't believe this was really happening. Wellington was looking at her with such kindness and respect, the way no one had looked at her in years. "When I was growing up," Wellington continued, his voice growing stronger, "my mother worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. She cleaned offices at night just like Rosa here, and when she came home exhausted and barely able to stand, she would hum while she made dinner or folded laundry." The room was completely quiet now, everyone hanging on his words. That humming wasn't perfect. My mother couldn't read music, and she certainly never had piano lessons, but it was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard because it came from love. It came from a woman who refused to let life's hardships steal her joy. Wellington turned back to Rosa. "When you played that note, I heard my mother's voice again. I heard every lullaby she ever hummed, every song she sang while scrubbing floors that belonged to people who looked right through her." Rosa felt tears running down her cheeks. She tried to speak but couldn't find her voice. "This is ridiculous," someone in the crowd said loudly. Rosa recognized the voice. It was the man with gold cufflinks she had overheard earlier. "You can't seriously tell us that the janitor deserves $10,000 for pressing one key on the piano." A murmur of agreement rippled through parts of the crowd. Rosa felt her face burn with shame. Maybe they were right. Maybe she had been foolish to think she belonged up here with these important people. But Wellington's expression hardened as he looked out at the crowd. "You want to know why Rosa's note was different? Because she understands something that many of you have forgotten. Music isn't about showing off your training or proving how sophisticated you are. It's about connection. It's about truth." He walked over to his jacket, which was draped over a chair near the stage. From the inner pocket, he pulled out a checkbook. "I promised $10,000 to whoever could play one perfect note," he said, beginning to write. "And Rosa has more than earned it. Wait, Rosa finally found her voice. Sir, I can't accept that money. I was just doing what felt right. Wellington looked up from his checkbook, surprised. What do you mean you can't accept it? Rosa stood up from the piano bench, her legs still shaky. I'm nobody special. I'm just a cleaning lady who got carried away. These people, she gestured toward the crowd, they've studied music for years. They deserve it more than I do. Rosa, Wellington said gently, may I ask you something? Of course, sir. Do you have children? Rosa nodded. 2. Carlos is 16 and Isabella is 14. And what do you do this job for? Why do you work so hard? For them, Rosa said without hesitation. Everything I do is for them. I want them to have chances I never had. Wellington smiled and finished writing the check. Then you're exactly the person this money should go to. You understand what my mother understood, that love is what makes music meaningful. He tore the check from the book and held it out to Rosa. She stared at it, afraid to touch it. $10,000. More money than she had ever seen in one place. I still don't think this is right, she said, but her voice was weaker now. She was thinking about Carlos working at the grocery store, about Isabella drawing on old paper because they couldn't afford art supplies. Rosa, Wellington said, let me tell you something about my mother. She would have been about your age when she was working those 3 jobs, and if someone had offered her $10,000 for sharing her gift with the world, do you know what she would have done? Rosa shook her head. She would have taken it gratefully, not because she was greedy, but because she understood that sometimes you have to accept help to give your children a better life. Rosa looked out at the crowd. Some people were nodding in agreement now, though others still looked skeptical. Mr. Chen stood at the edge of the stage, his face unreadable. Your note, Wellington continued, was perfect because it came from the same place my mother's humming came from. It came from a heart that knows struggle but refuses to give up hope. That's worth far more than $10,000, but it's what I have to offer. Slowly, Rosa reached out and took the check. Her hands were trembling so badly she could barely hold it steady enough to read the amount. $10,000 made out to Rosa Martinez. Thank you, she whispered. You have no idea what this means to my family. Wellington smiled. Actually, I think I do. But Rosa, can I ask you one more favor? Anything, sir. Would you play something else? Anything you'd like. I have a feeling you know more than just one note. Rosa felt panic flutter in her chest. Oh, no, sir. I couldn't. I haven't really played piano in years. That one note was just, I don't know, a lucky moment. But Wellington was looking at her with such encouragement, and she could see genuine curiosity in his eyes. Behind him, the crowd waited to see what would happen next. Rosa thought about Abuela Carmen, about all those afternoons spent learning simple songs on the old upright piano. She remembered Amazing Grace, the hymn Abuela had taught her, because it was both beautiful and not too difficult for small hands. There is one song, Rosa said quietly. My grandmother taught it to me when I was little, but I'm not sure I remember it perfectly. Perfect is overrated, Wellington said with a grin. Play what you remember. Rosa sat back down at the piano bench. This time she felt less nervous and more focused. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play Amazing Grace, the melody rising soft and clear in the elegant concert hall. The song wasn't complicated, but Rosa played it the way Abuela had taught her, with feeling instead of flashiness. Some of the notes were a little hesitant and she simplified the harder parts, but the emotion came through in every phrase. When she finished, the room erupted in genuine applause. This time, even the skeptical guests were clapping enthusiastically. Rosa looked up to see Wellington beaming at her with pure joy. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced to the crowd, let me introduce you to the most talented musician who's played on this stage tonight. Rosa Martinez, everyone. As the applause continued, Rosa felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Pride. Not the embarrassed kind of pride that comes from showing off, but the deep satisfaction of sharing something real and having it be appreciated. She had found her voice again, and nothing would ever be the same. As the applause died down, Rosa remained at the piano, still processing what had just happened. The check in her pocket felt surreal, like something from a dream she might wake up from at any moment. But Wellington's encouraging smile and the genuine warmth she saw in many faces in the crowd told her this was very real. Rosa, Wellington said, pulling up a chair next to the piano bench. I hope you don't mind me asking, but where did you learn to play like that? That wasn't the playing of someone who just knows one song. Rosa felt her cheeks flush. She had been dreading this question, knowing it would reveal the secret she had been keeping for so long. It's a long story, sir. We have time, Wellington said gently, and I think everyone here would love to hear it. The crowd had moved closer to the stage, their earlier skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity. Even Mr. Chen had stepped forward, though he still looked bewildered by the entire situation. Rosa took a deep breath. My grandmother Carmen was the church pianist at our little parish when I was growing up. She had learned to play as a child in Mexico, and music was the most important thing in her life. She paused, gathering her courage to continue. When I was 5, she started teaching me. Every day after school, I would go to her apartment and practice on her old upright piano. It was missing some keys and desperately needed tuning, but to me it was perfect. Wellington nodded encouragingly. How long did you study with her? 7 years, Rosa said, the memory bringing both joy and sadness. By the time I was 12, I could play most of the hymns for church service. Abuela said I had natural talent, that I could be really good if I kept practicing. What happened when you were 12? Dr. Hayes asked, having moved closer to listen. Rosa's voice grew quieter. My father lost his job at the factory. We couldn't make rent for 3 months. Abuela's piano was the only thing valuable enough to sell. A heavy silence fell over the group. Rosa could see understanding and sympathy in many faces. We got $300 for it, Rosa continued. It wasn't much, but it helped us stay in our apartment for another month. Abuela cried when they took it away, but she told me the music would always be inside me, even without the piano. Wellington's eyes were moist again. And you never played after that? Not really. Sometimes I would sneak into the church after school and practice on their piano. But the priest caught me one day and told me it was only for official church business. After that, I was too embarrassed to ask permission. Rosa looked down at her hands, which were still resting on the keys. When I got married and had children, I always dreamed of getting another piano someday. I wanted to teach Carlos and Isabella the way Abuela had taught me. But there was never enough money, and after Miguel died, she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. You've been carrying all this music inside you for 30 years, Wellington said softly. No wonder that note was so powerful. It had 3 decades of emotion behind it. Dr. Hayes stepped forward, her earlier dismissiveness completely gone. Rosa, I owe you an apology. When I heard you play, I was too caught up in thinking about technique and training to recognize real talent. You have a gift. I don't know about that, Rosa said modestly. I'm just someone who loves music. That's exactly what makes you gifted, Wellington said. Rosa, can I ask you something that might sound strange? She nodded. Have you ever thought about teaching? About sharing your grandmother's approach to music with other people? Rosa laughed, but not in a mean way. Sir, I clean buildings for a living. Who would want to learn music from someone like me? You'd be surprised, Wellington said, his voice taking on an excited tone. Rosa, what you have can't be taught in most music schools. You understand that music is about emotion and connection, not just hitting the right notes at the right time. He stood up and began pacing, clearly getting an idea. My foundation has been looking for ways to bring music education to communities that can't afford traditional lessons. We have the funding, but we've been struggling to find teachers who really understand the communities we want to serve. Rosa felt her heart start to race again, but this time with hope instead of fear. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe tonight wasn't just about my little challenge. Maybe it was about finding someone who could help us reach people the way music reached you, through the heart instead of through expensive schools and formal training. The room buzzed with excitement as people began to understand what Wellington was suggesting. Rosa felt overwhelmed by the possibility he was presenting. But I don't have any teaching credentials, she protested. I don't even have a high school diploma. I had to drop out when Isabella was born. Rosa, Dr. Hayes interjected. Some of the most powerful teachers I know never went to college. They teach from experience and passion. What you demonstrated tonight, that understanding of how music connects to real life, that's something most formally trained musicians struggle with. Wellington nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Rosa, what if I told you that my foundation has been planning to open a community music center right here in your neighborhood? We've been looking for someone to run it, someone who understands both music and the challenges facing working families. Rosa felt dizzy. I don't understand. You want me to run a music center? I want you to consider it, Wellington said. The salary would be good, probably 3 times what you're making now. Full benefits, including health insurance for you and your children, and most importantly, you'd be doing work that matters, sharing your gift with people who need it most. Tears were streaming down Rosa's face now. She couldn't speak. Wellington pulled out his phone. Rosa, I'd like you to meet someone. Dr. Patricia Chen, yes, the same last name as your supervisor, but no relation, runs our foundation's education programs. She's been working on this community center project for 2 years. As Wellington made the call, Rosa turned to look at Mr. Chen, who had been unusually quiet during this entire conversation. To her surprise, he was smiling. Rosa, he said, approaching the stage, I owe you an apology too. I've been so focused on keeping staff invisible that I never really saw who you were. What you did tonight took courage I'm not sure I would have had. Dr. Patricia Chen answered Wellington's call on the second ring, and he put it on speaker. Patricia, I'm at the Harmony Arts Center Gala, and I think I've found our community center director. That's wonderful. James, tell me about them. Wellington looked at Rosa. Her name is Rosa Martinez. She's a single mother who's been working as a janitor while raising 2 teenagers. She learned piano from her grandmother and just gave the most moving musical performance I've heard in years. More importantly, she understands exactly what we're trying to accomplish with this program. There was a pause on the other end of the line. James, does she have experience running programs or managing staff? She's been managing a household and raising children while working multiple jobs, Wellington replied. That takes more organizational skills than most management positions. And Patricia, when you hear her story and see her connect with music, you'll understand why she's perfect for this. Can she be in my office Monday morning? I'd love to meet her and discuss the position. Rosa found her voice. Dr. Chen, I'd be honored to meet with you, but I should tell you honestly, I don't know anything about running a music center. Rosa, Dr. Chen's warm voice came through the speaker. The best programs are run by people who care deeply about their mission. Everything else can be learned. James is right. If you can manage a family while working multiple jobs, you can learn to manage a community center. After Wellington ended the call, Rosa sat in stunned silence. In the span of one evening, her entire life had changed. The $10,000 check in her pocket was just the beginning. There's one more thing, Wellington said with a grin. The community center is going to need a piano. I think I know where we can find one that would be perfect. Rosa looked at him questioningly. There's a beautiful old upright piano in my mother's house. She would have loved knowing it was going to someone who understands what music really means. Rosa began to cry again, but this time, they were tears of pure joy. Sir, I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me, Wellington said. Thank your grandmother. She's the one who taught you that music comes from the heart. Everything else is just details. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, many stopped to congratulate Rosa and share their own stories about family members who had influenced their love of music. The woman in the gold dress, who had been one of the first to attempt Wellington's challenge, approached with tears in her eyes. My mother was a lot like your grandmother, she said. She sang while she cooked, and it was the most beautiful sound in our house. I'd forgotten that until tonight. Thank you for reminding me. Rosa realized that her moment at the piano had done more than just win her money and a job opportunity. It had reminded everyone in the room of the simple truth that music, at its core, is about love and connection. As she finally prepared to leave the concert hall, Rosa took one last look at the piano where everything had changed. Tomorrow she would go home to Carlos and Isabella and tell them that their lives were about to get much better. But tonight, she was just grateful to have found her voice again. Rosa barely slept that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling of her small apartment, the $10,000 check tucked safely in her purse on the nightstand. Every few minutes she would touch the purse just to make sure it was real, that the entire evening hadn't been some impossible dream. When Carlos and Isabella woke up the next morning, they found their mother sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, still wearing her work clothes from the night before. Mom, did you even go to bed? Isabella asked, pouring herself a bowl of cereal with the careful precision of someone who knows not to waste even a single flake. I couldn't sleep, Rosa admitted. I have something important to tell you both. Carlos looked up from his homework, which he had been finishing before school. At 16, he had learned to be practical about everything, including his expectations. What's wrong? Did something happen at work? Rosa smiled. Something happened, but it's good. Very good. She told them everything. About Wellington's challenge, about finding the courage to play the piano, about the job offer and the money. By the time she finished, both children were staring at her in shock. $10,000? Isabella whispered. Mom, are you serious? And this man wants to give you a real job? Carlos added. Like an office job with benefits? Rosa nodded, tears forming in her eyes as she saw the hope growing on their faces. If I get the position, and Dr. Chen seemed very encouraging, everything is going to change for us. The next few days passed in a blur. On Monday morning, Rosa took her first sick day in 3 years to meet with Dr. Patricia Chen at the foundation offices downtown. She wore her only good dress, the black one she had bought for Miguel's funeral 2 years earlier. Dr. Chen turned out to be a kind woman in her 50s, who listened intently as Rosa told her story. The office walls were covered with photos of children playing instruments, reading books, and participating in various educational programs. James told me about your performance Friday night, Dr. Chen said, but I'd like to understand more about your vision for community music education. Rosa had worried about this question all weekend. Dr. Chen, I don't have a fancy vision with big words and theories, but I know what it's like to love music and not have access to it. I know what it's like to watch your children miss opportunities because you can't afford to give them what other kids have. She paused, gathering her thoughts. If I ran this center, I would want every child to feel welcome, regardless of whether they could pay or whether they had any musical training. I would want parents to feel comfortable bringing their kids, even if the parents couldn't read music themselves. Dr. Chen smiled. That's exactly the vision we're looking for. Rosa, can you tell me about a time when you had to solve a difficult problem under pressure? Rosa almost laughed. Dr. Chen, my entire life has been solving difficult problems under pressure. When Isabella got pneumonia last year, and I had to work extra shifts to pay the hospital bill while taking care of her. When Carlos needed school supplies and our utilities were about to be shut off in the same week. When our landlord raised the rent and I had to find a second job within 2 weeks. And how did you handle those situations? I did what needed to be done. I asked for help when I had to, worked harder when I could, and never gave up on finding solutions. You learn to be creative when you don't have many options. Dr. Chen nodded, making notes on her clipboard. Rosa, I'm going to be honest with you. This position requires someone who can manage a staff of part-time teachers, coordinate with local schools, handle a budget, and deal with everything from ordering supplies to organizing concerts. Are you prepared for that level of responsibility? Rosa felt a flutter of doubt. Dr. Chen, I've never managed anyone except my own children, but I'm willing to learn whatever I need to learn, and I promise you that no one will care more about making this program successful than I will. That's what James said you'd tell me. Dr. Chen smiled. Rosa, we'd like to offer you the position. The starting salary is $45,000 a year, with full health benefits and 2 weeks paid vacation. You'd start as soon as you can give notice at your current job. Rosa felt the room spinning. $45,000 a year was more than she had made in her best year combining both of her jobs. Dr. Chen, I accept. And thank you for believing in me. Thank you for being exactly what this program needs, Dr. Chen replied. Now let's talk about getting you ready to run a community music center. The next month was a whirlwind of activity. Rosa gave notice at both her jobs, enduring a mixture of congratulations and skepticism from her coworkers. Mr. Chen was actually supportive, saying he had always known she was capable of more than cleaning buildings. She spent 2 weeks in training with Dr. Chen, learning about program management, budget planning, and educational coordination. It was overwhelming at first. Rosa hadn't been in a classroom setting since she was a teenager, but she threw herself into the work with determination. The community center space was in a renovated storefront in Rosa's own neighborhood, just 4 blocks from her apartment. When Wellington took her to see it for the first time, Rosa was amazed by the transformation that had taken place. What had been an empty retail space was now filled with small practice rooms, a main classroom and a small performance area. And here, Wellington said, leading her to the center of the main room, is something special. Rosa gasped. In the middle of the room sat a beautiful upright piano, polished to a warm glow. It was old but well maintained, with intricate woodwork and brass pedals that gleamed in the afternoon light. "This was my mother's piano," Wellington said softly. "She bought it used when I was 10, and she played it every day until she died. I think she would love knowing it's going to help other families discover music the way she helped me." Rosa ran her fingers over the keys, pressing them gently to hear the rich, warm tone. "It's beautiful, but Mr. Wellington, this is too much. You've already done so much for us. Rosa, let me tell you something my mother taught me. When you've been blessed with good fortune, the only way to keep it is to share it. This piano sitting in my house wasn't blessing anyone. But here, with you teaching children and families, it will make music every day." As Rosa played a few notes of amazing grace on the piano, she felt her grandmother's presence so strongly it took her breath away. Abuela would have loved this moment, seeing Rosa not just playing music again, but preparing to share it with an entire community. The hiring process for teachers was Rosa's first major challenge as director. She interviewed dozens of candidates, from recent college graduates to retired music teachers. But she was most excited about 3 particular hires: Mrs. Rodriguez, a neighbor who had played guitar in a mariachi band for 30 years but never taught professionally; David Kim, a young man who had learned violin in the same kind of community program Rosa was now running; and Angela Thompson, a gospel singer who wanted to teach children that music could be both joyful and meaningful. "I love that none of them fit the traditional mold," Dr. Chen observed during a planning meeting. "They all understand music as a community experience, not just individual achievement." 2 weeks before the center's opening, Rosa received a surprise visit at home. Carlos answered the door to find James Wellington standing on their doorstep, holding a large wrapped package. "Mr. Wellington," Rosa called from the kitchen where she was reviewing lesson plans. "What brings you here?" "I have something for Carlos and Isabella," he said, setting the package on their small dining table. "Rosa told me that they've never had the chance to explore music themselves, and I thought it was time to change that." Carlos and Isabella exchanged excited glances as they unwrapped the gift. Inside were 2 instrument cases, a violin for Isabella and a drum set for Carlos. "Mr. Wellington." "We can't accept this," Rosa protested, but she was smiling through her tears. "Actually, you can't refuse," Wellington grinned. "These instruments belong to the community center. I'm just asking Carlos and Isabella to be the first students to borrow them." Isabella opened the violin case with reverent care, her eyes wide with wonder. Carlos was already examining the drums, his face lit up with joy. "Mom," Isabella whispered, "is this really happening?" Rosa looked around their small apartment, which suddenly felt different. Not bigger or fancier, but fuller somehow. Fuller of possibility, of hope, of music waiting to be made. "Yes, mi amor," she said, pulling both children into a hug. "This is really happening." That night, as Rosa listened to Carlos experimenting with rhythm patterns and Isabella carefully drawing her bow across the violin strings, she thought about how much had changed since that Friday night, when she had dared to play one note on a fancy piano. She had found her voice again, but more than that, she had found her purpose. In 2 weeks, the Martinez Community Music Center would open its doors, and Rosa would begin the work she now knew she was meant to do, sharing the gift her grandmother had given her with anyone who wanted to learn. The transformation was complete, but the real music was just beginning. 6 months later, Rosa stood in the main room of the Martinez Community Music Center, watching 23 children aged 5 to 17 rehearse for their first community concert. The sound that filled the room was far from perfect. Voices sometimes cracked, instruments occasionally squeaked, and the timing wasn't always quite right. But to Rosa, it was the most beautiful music she had ever heard. "Okay, everyone," she called out, clapping her hands gently to get their attention. "Let's run through this little light of mine one more time. Remember, don't worry about hitting every note perfectly. Sing from your hearts." In the front row, 8-year-old Miguel Santos, no relation, but the name always made Rosa smile, waved his hand enthusiastically. "Miss Rosa, my abuela is coming to the concert tonight. She's never heard me sing before." "That's wonderful, Miguel," Rosa said, crouching down to his level. "What do you think she'll like most about your singing?" The little boy thought seriously for a moment. "I think she'll like that I'm not scared anymore. When I first came here, I was too shy to even whisper. But you taught me that music makes people brave." Rosa felt the familiar tightness in her throat that came whenever her students reminded her, why this work mattered so much. You're absolutely right. Music does make us brave. As the children continued their rehearsal, Rosa noticed James Wellington slip quietly into the back of the room. He had been coming to the center regularly, not as a donor checking on his investment, but as someone who genuinely loved seeing the program succeed. Tonight he had brought someone with him, an elegant woman in her 60s who Rosa didn't recognize. After rehearsal ended and the children went home to prepare for the evening concert, Wellington approached with his companion. "Rosa, I'd like you to meet someone very special," he said. "This is Dr. Elena Vasquez, the Director of Arts Education for the entire school district." Dr. Vasquez smiled warmly as she shook Rosa's hand. "Ms. Martinez, I've been hearing remarkable things about your program. James tells me that you've had over 200 families participate in your classes in just 6 months." "Word travels fast in this neighborhood," Rosa said modestly. "When parents see their children excited about learning, they tell their friends." "It's more than that," Dr. Vasquez said, looking around the center with obvious admiration. "I've visited a lot of music programs over the years, and most of them serve families who already have access to arts education. What you've created here is reaching families that traditional programs never touch." She pulled out a folder from her briefcase. "Rosa, I have a proposal for you. The school district has been struggling to provide adequate music education in our elementary schools, especially in low-income neighborhoods. We have the funding, but we've been looking for someone who understands how to make music accessible to children who have never had exposure to it." Rosa felt her heart start racing. She had learned to recognize that feeling. It usually meant her life was about to change again. "What kind of proposal?" she asked. "We want to partner with your center to bring music education directly into 5 elementary schools. You would train teachers, develop curriculum, and oversee the program implementation. It would mean expanding your staff and your reach significantly." Wellington grinned. "Rosa, you'd be affecting the lives of over 1,500 children." Rosa sat down heavily in one of the small chairs her students used. 6 months ago, she had been emptying trash cans and cleaning bathrooms. Now she was being asked to design music education for an entire school district. "Dr. Vasquez, I'm honored that you would consider me for something this important. But I have to ask, are you sure I'm qualified for this kind of responsibility?" Dr. Vasquez pulled up another small chair and sat facing Rosa. "Let me tell you what I saw during your rehearsal today. I saw children who were completely engaged and excited about making music together. I saw a teacher who knew every child's name and something personal about their lives. I saw students helping each other instead of competing with each other." She paused, looking around the room again. "Most importantly, I saw children who believed they belonged in a musical space. That's something you can't teach in education school, Rosa. That comes from understanding what it feels like to be excluded and choosing to include others." As Dr. Vasquez explained the details of the partnership, Rosa found herself thinking about Abuela Carmen. What would her grandmother think about seeing Rosa go from learning on an old broken piano to designing music education for hundreds of children? "There's one condition I would need," Rosa said after Dr. Vasquez finished her presentation. "What's that?" "Any program we develop has to include the families, not just the children. Parents need to feel welcome to participate, even if they don't read music or play instruments. Music education works best when the whole family is involved." Dr. Vasquez smiled. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that convinced me you're the right person for this job." That evening, the community center was packed for the concert. Rosa had expected maybe 50 people, but over 100 family members, neighbors, and supporters crowded into the small performance space. Wellington had arranged for additional seating, and people lined the walls and doorways to watch. As Rosa welcomed the audience, she looked out at faces that represented her entire neighborhood. Mrs. Chen from the corner market sat next to the Gonzalez family from her apartment building. Her former supervisor, Mr. Chen, was there with his wife, beaming with pride. Carlos and Isabella sat in the front row, Carlos with his drumsticks and Isabella with her violin, both ready to join the finale. 6 months ago, Rosa began, I was working as a janitor in a fancy concert hall, watching wealthy people write checks to support music education for children like ours. I never imagined that one day I would be standing here, watching our own children make music in our own community. She gestured toward the piano where it all began, Wellington's mother's piano, which had become the heart of their program. Music has always been about bringing people together, about sharing joy and hope and love. Tonight you're going to hear music that comes from the hearts of children who have learned that they have something beautiful to offer the world. The concert was magical in the way that only community performances can be. Every song was met with enthusiastic applause. Every solo was supported by encouraging cheers from the audience. When 8-year-old Miguel sang his solo verse, his grandmother in the front row cried openly with pride. For the finale, Rosa had arranged for the entire community to sing together, performers and audience, children and adults, everyone joining voices for This Little Light of Mine. As the song built to its climax, Rosa stepped away from the piano and let the community carry the music themselves, looking out at the faces surrounding her, Carlos keeping steady rhythm on the drums, Isabella's violin soaring above the voices, Wellington singing along with tears in his eyes, Dr. Vasquez taking notes on her phone. Rosa felt the presence of everyone who had brought her to this moment. Miguel, her husband who had believed she could do anything. Abuela Carmen, who had planted music in her heart and taught her that it would always be there when she needed it. Even her old supervisor, Mr. Chen, who had unknowingly pushed her toward this destiny by making her feel invisible, teaching her to value the dignity that comes from being truly seen. After the concert, as families slowly said their goodbyes and helped clean up, Wellington approached Rosa with another surprise. "There's one more thing," he said, pulling out an envelope. "The foundation board met this week to discuss your school district partnership. They voted unanimously to fund a scholarship program in your name." Rosa opened the envelope to find a certificate announcing the Rosa Martinez Music Scholarship Fund, which would provide instruments and lessons for children whose families couldn't afford them. "Mr. Wellington," Rosa said, her voice thick with emotion, "when I played that note 6 months ago, I never imagined it would lead to all this." "Rosa," Wellington replied, "that note changed my life too. It reminded me that the best way to honor someone's memory is to continue their work in the world. My mother would have loved knowing that her piano was helping to create this." As Rosa locked up the center that night, she took one last look around the main room. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Planning for the school district partnership, training new teachers, developing curriculum that would reach even more families. But tonight she was simply grateful. She had learned that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest acts of courage. One note played with honesty and love had opened doors she never knew existed. Now she was helping other people find their own notes, their own voices, their own courage to share their gifts with the world. Rosa turned off the lights and headed home to her children, humming softly as she walked. The melody was one Abuela had taught her long ago, but tonight it sounded like hope, like possibility, like the promise that the best music is yet to be made. In her small apartment, Carlos was practicing a new rhythm pattern while Isabella worked on her scales. They looked up as their mother came through the door, and Rosa saw in their faces the same joy and excitement that had filled the concert hall just hours before. "Mom, did you see how many people came tonight?" Isabella asked, setting down her violin carefully.